What is it about the Good Friday Agreement that has sustained the peace for so long?
Probably the will of the people. You know, the people have opted for this breakthrough, as it was at the time. Things are much better. It's imperfect, as everybody keeps saying, but we're in a much better place. And even though there are difficulties currently, it's my belief that they will be resolved in the time ahead.
Now, you were intimately involved in those negotiations. How touch and go did they seem at the time?
Well, it's a matter just of every single negotiation, particularly when you come to the end point of a programme of throat. Let me start again. It's a matter for every negotiation when you come particularly to an end point or an important juncture. There's always a doubt as to whether everybody can sign on, and just before we came to the agreement, the DUP had withdrawn, and then senior members, Arlene Foster and Jeffrey Donaldson from the Ulster Unionist Party, they left. So while the rest of us were relatively settled, we thought it was the best that could be got. David Trimble had a big challenge, and thankfully he rose to that challenge. And you know, it's a process. You see, it isn't an event. You know, peace is the way that it has worked out needs ongoing effort, needs ongoing work, and needs nurtured and nourished.
You took a personal risk. David Trimble took a risk. Tony Blair, Bertie Ahern. What was it about the characters involved at that time that allowed this extraordinary breakthrough?
Well, we in Sinn Fein, in fairness, if I may say so, had been arguing for peace, mostly unnoticed by the establishment, which was not for peace. They were excluding us, even though we had a considerable mandate. So when we came to the negotiations, we were match fit. We had a strategy, we had set objectives for ourselves, and we had high expectations, but we knew that we could only get as much as we could get within that particular point. I think the strength of the coincidence of Bertie Ahern, Tony Blair, a steady Sinn Féin leadership, and the other leaders who were here, that was shown after the agreement, when there were numerous difficulties which had to be overcome. Okay. John Hume and I, 12 years perhaps before the agreement, started talks which, to some degree, got some unanimity, some consensus among the Irish government, Irish America, the SDLP and ourselves. So all of that came into play as we sought to make progress.
This is probably an impossible question, but the violence that ended, or certainly the endemic violence that ended with the Good Friday Agreement, with which to an extent you were associated, was it worth it?
Well, that's a question which is impossible to answer. The struggle certainly was worth it, and the struggle isn't over. I mean, I want to see...
What do you mean by the struggle not being over?
Well, the peace process has to be continuously worked at. The political process is broken down at the moment. It has to be worked at. But look, I want to see an end to English rule in this country. I mean, there's nothing more straightforward than people having the right to govern ourselves. We're still denied that right. The Good Friday Agreement gives us a means by which the people of this island, north and south, will decide upon the future. So when we get to that point, which I believe we will get to, then, of course, it will be well worth everything that we've all gone through.
Now, you're 74. Do you think you will see a united Ireland in your lifetime?
If I live long enough.
But what does that mean?
So.
What does that mean? Does it mean 150? No, what do you mean? What give us the timetable? I actually spoke to Mary Lou MacDonald. She thought within 10 years there could be a border poll.
Well, certainly Mary Lou would say the same thing. We need a process of planning. A vote and a referendum on the future needs to be preceded by an inclusive discussion. People have issues, people want issues resolved, whether it's about the economy, whether it's about health services, public services, whether it's about flags, emblems, how we will govern ourselves and so on. So I wouldn't like to see a repeat of Brexit. You know, what I would like to see is a sensible planning process led by the Irish government, but involving everyone who wants to be involved.
But that requires trust on all sides. If you look at what the SNP has been through over recent years, they would say that they probably don't trust the British government when it comes to, you know, facilitating the kind of referendum they want. Would you trust the British government to honour the agreements of the Good Friday Agreement?
I think the issue of trust is one which is overplayed.
Okay.
Of course, it would be great if we all trusted each other. Why on earth would I ever trust the British government? You know, I'm an Irish person. You know, I'm living in a partitioned island. I've been interned without trial. I've been shot. My home has been bombed. Why would I trust a British government? What I do is I trust people, the ordinary people who come out and voted for this agreement and who will come out again in a referendum when we have it. The British government doesn't want a referendum. I'm certain of that, not just in Scotland but here as well. However, popular opinion in Ireland, and I believe within the Irish diaspora, if the Irish government takes a leadership position, the British government will have no other alternative but to keep to the agreement, which includes the right to a referendum.
But of course, this cuts both ways. If it's clear that people on both sides of what used to be a hard border, no longer a hard border, are not ready, do not want a border poll, you will honour that?
No, I live here. I resent greatly the fact that my island home is partitioned. I resent greatly that we're denied the right to govern ourselves. But we'll get on with it, and we make the most of it, and we'll try and make this as good a place as possible for the people who live here.
And this conference, remarkable conference, is partly about involving younger people born in the 25 years since this historic agreement. What do you think they should understand about their history, about the Troubles?
Well, I think there are 500,000 people born since the Good Friday Agreement. So the first thing to note is that unless they had personal experience of the conflict, that they've grown up in a conflict, more or less conflict-free zone. I think we should all understand our history, you know, and whatever part of society we come from, we should understand our part in that history. But look, I wouldn't beat up on young people if they take it for granted. I actually, lots of times would say to people when they say to me, young people take this for granted. And I say, well, that's a good thing. Let them take it for granted.
Now, we haven't seen a restoration of devolved government here. How fragile, therefore, is the settlement, is the peace?
Oh, the peace process is solid. You know, the success thus far is in the thousands of people who are elected.
So we're not going to see a return to violence, in your view, ever?
There's always a capacity for some group or other, as we saw tragically recently, to take some action, but we're never going to see a return. Why not? Because the IRA, which was the main combatant from the Republican side, did the right thing, went away, guaranteed the peace by moving itself from the arena. So, and anyway, whatever one may argue about what preceded and, you know, the reasons for the conflict and so on, there's no reason now. We have a peaceful way to get Irish unity. Let's use this time, as Mary Lou said, this decade, to try and persuade those who are doubtful that that's the best way for us.
But where we're sitting, government is not working. Do you have any sympathy for Geoffrey Donaldson's refusal to re-enter or to allow the Assembly to reconvene, to reform the executive?
I have an understanding, more than a sympathy, because I simply believe that leaders have to lead. And I'm hopeful that Geoffrey, when he has the space to do so, will lead people in a positive way forward.
What could create that space?
Well, he has it. He's a mandate. We have an executive which has ministerial positions which his party have the right to serve in. We have all sorts of difficulties, not least because of Tory austerity policy. We have a crumbling health service, we have homelessness, we have all the difficulties that beset a society, a first world society like ours. But it needs governance by people who live here. So Jeffrey, I would hope, he has said that the issue of Michel O'Neill becoming the First Minister is not an issue for him. And I believe that. It may be an issue for others within his party. But if you're going to be a leader, you have to be a leader. You have to go forward. You obviously have to take people with you, but you need to know yourself what you want to do. I think Jeffrey knows what he has to do.
And can I just, on the issue of the Good Friday Agreement itself, even Tony Blair has said that he thinks it could evolve. Plainly, public opinion within Northern Ireland has shifted. The Alliance Party is now more of a force than it ever looked as though it could be 25 years ago. Do you think that that structure, which says the executive can only be formed by essentially, a unionist party, and effectively Sinn Fein, do you think that's still appropriate?
Well, it's the will of the electorate that has worked out the way that it has worked out. I think that the first thing is to get the institutions back working, get the executive back working, and then if parties have propositions around any of this, then let's listen and let's talk about it.
But it's not possible for the Alliance under the existing agreement to ever be part of the executive, is it?
Yeah, yes, it is. The voters decide who will be part of the executive. So if the Alliance Party gets sufficient votes to put themselves in that position, then that's what will happen.
And so you don't believe that there's a sense in which the agreement has to evolve, to use some people's words?
Well, I think it's first things first. Get the institutions in place. And of course you cannot say no to listening to other people's ideas of what might be better. So let's listen to their ideas, but let's not put the cart before the horse. First thing is, we don't have governance at the moment by local people who live here, who are mandated to be in that government. Let's get that in place, and then everything else will follow.
And we're unfortunately almost out of time. There are a couple of other things. You have said that if we can't get the executive up and running, you want to see much more of a role for the Dublin government when it comes to the governance of Northern Ireland. How would that work in practice?
Well, as part of the Good Friday Agreement, there are north, south, east, west, and then internal arrangements around the executive, but they're all interlocked. They're all interlocked, and we have an intergovernmental conference which the two governments are obliged. It isn't that they have a choice or it's an option. They're obliged, if there are issues which need that, well, to put that in progress. So that should happen as an immediate thing. The second thing is the Irish government needs to come forward. The Irish government is a co-guarantor of this agreement. It's an international agreement. I don't think the Tory party is invested in this agreement at all.
Do you think they understand Northern Ireland, the Tory party?
Only in their own small little England their way. Not as one would expect, being part of a government, to be obliged to be part of an agreement. They're tearing the agreement up. They're getting rid of procedures which were agreed by all the parties and the British government to deal with legacy issues. But they've torn that up. They're tearing up the human rights aspects of it, and they have been, letting down and betraying, to use a unionist word, the unionist parties. Like over the last 8 or 9 years, over the last 3 or 4 British Prime Ministers, they've all made promises, made commitments, done deals with the DUP and then torn them up. So I forget the question, but the point is that Well,
I was really asking, I suppose, in a nutshell, whether you had confidence, actually in Leo Varadkar as much as Rishi Sunak, that in the absence of a functioning devolved government here in Northern Ireland, that they will take what you regard as the necessary steps.
Well, I think they have to. It isn't a matter of whether I have confidence in them or not. It's a matter of whether they fulfil their obligations, and they have to. And we would look to our friends in the European Union, we would look to our friends in Irish America and in the White House to remind them of that. I mean, that there's been a very powerful number of visits here in recent times by people who came from outside the island to help with the peace process. That said, you've just heard George Mitchell given a long explanation of the process. So it has worked.
And you would agree with him that the 100%ers are just wrong, I'm assuming?
Absolutely. Yeah. We all have to learn the art of compromise. You can stay with your fundamental principles, but strategically, the art of strategy is to develop strategic compromises.
Now, final question on a slightly different note. You've been a friend of Jeremy Corbyn for quite a long time. Do you think the Labour Party have treated him properly?
No.
Anything would you want to add to that?
Well, I don't like to be involved in other people's parties' internal business, but Jeremy has been an outstanding friend of Ireland, but also of working people and of people who are in difficulties and of people throughout the world who have been in difficulties. And if you look at his stance on all of these issues going back a long time, he's been a pioneer of good politics, and no party can afford to lose someone like that.
Gerry Adams, very good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.